Hello, and welcome to the Health Equity Book Series, another session of our book series brought to you by the Tennessee Department of Health. Welcome, 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 everyone. My name is Elizabeth Hart. I am the Director of the Office of Faith-Based and Community Engagement at the Tennessee Department of Health. The Health Equity Book Series is brought to you by the Division of Health Disparities Elimination, the Office of Primary Prevention, and the Health Equity Advisory Team, all at the Tennessee Department of Health. Welcome, welcome, welcome. A couple of housekeeping reminders. We encourage you to leave your questions and type your questions into the chat box. We will get to them during the discussion today. If you are not already a member of the Tennessee Health Disparities Task Force and want to join, we would love to have you. We have four main priorities: chronic disease, mental health, environmental health and justice, and infectious diseases. We encourage you to join our task force. Simply email tdh.ofbce@tn.gov. Again, that's tdh.ofbce@tn.gov. And of course, we encourage you to learn more about health equity and health disparities work that's being done at the Tennessee Department of Health. We want you to visit our website at www.healthdisparitiestn.com. That's our website at www.healthdisparitiestn.com. We have thoroughly enjoyed this health equity book series, and we have one more for you after today. And we are excited to announce we will welcome Dr. Damon Tweedy for our final session on November 8th. He is the author of Black Man in a White Coat, A Doctor's Reflections on Race and Medicine. We are really, really excited about that particular discussion and today's discussion as well. So without any further ado, let me introduce today's author. We are extraordinarily excited and honored to have her with us today. Marita Golden is the author of 20 works of fiction and nonfiction. Her books include the novels The Wide Circumference of Love, After, and The Edge of Heaven, and the memoirs Migrations of the Heart, Saving Our Sons, and Don't Play in the Sun, One Woman's Journey Through the Color Complex, and the anthologies which she's edited: Us Against Alzheimer's, Stories of Family, Love, and Faith, and Gumbo, a celebration of African American writing, which she edited with the novelist E. Lynn Harris. Her most recent work of nonfiction is The Strong Black Woman: How a Myth Endangers the Physical and Mental Health of Black Women. And that's today's book that we'll be discussing. She is the recipient of many awards, including the Writers for Writers Award presented by Barnes and Nobles, and Poets and Writers, an award from the Authors Guild, and a fiction award for her novel After, awarded by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. She has lectured and read from her work internationally. Co-founder and president emerita of the Zora Neale Hurston Richard Wright Foundation, Marita Golden is a veteran teacher of writing. She taught at the University of Lagos in Nigeria and has served as a member of the faculties of the MFA Graduate Creative Writing programs at George Mason University and Virginia Commonwealth University. She has served as the Distinguished Writer in Residence for the Master's Creative Writing program at Johns Hopkins University and Prince George's Community College and the University of the District of Columbia. Whew. She has spoken at Harvard University, Yale University, and MIT, and has been the answer to a question on Jeopardy! As a literary consultant, she offers writing workshops, coaching, and manuscript evaluation services. Welcome, 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 Marita. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We've been working on this for quite a while, so I'm glad to finally be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And once again, for those that are joining the conversation, we encourage you to put your questions that you would like us to ask of Ms. Golden in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and get started and ask and get into some of this work that you have done in your career. So first question, what inspires you as a writer?
I'm a sort of addicted to storytelling. I see storytelling and I see stories as a really powerful connecting tissue that really binds people together. And I think I sort of came into the world to tell stories because I've been writing something, some kind of story ever since I was quite young. So storytelling for me is an obsessive habit that I find deeply satisfying.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's a powerful thing, right? To write our own stories. You know, what is one of your favorite parts of the writing process?
Well, I write both fiction and nonfiction. I've written several memoirs, I write journalism and novels. And sometimes people ask me which genre I prefer. And I think that for me, fiction has a particularly magical quality because I think all fiction to some extent is somewhat autobiographical. But even though we may use some of our personal experiences as a springboard, once we really get into the writing, you're really a conjurer, you're a magician, and you're really creating a world that only exists because of what you're writing, what you are imagining. And that's really quite powerful. I find writing memoirs and books like Strong Black Woman very satisfying, but there's something quite unique about creating a world in a novel.
Wonderful. Thank you. You know, we do a lot of storytelling in the public health world, right? As we look to improve and change behavior. So really important information there. You know, in this book, as you mentioned, The Strong Black Woman that you wrote, you dedicated the book to your grandmother, your mother, and your sister. Why was it important to dedicate it to them?
Well, they were all three strong Black women, strong in, I think, the traditional way that African American women have defined strength, somewhat self-sacrificial, there for everyone. I don't think that any of them prioritized self-care. I think that this whole conversation about self-care is really actually quite new, but they were women who made it possible for me to be me in different ways. And my sister had five boys that after her divorce, she raised pretty much as a single mother and with the support of surrogate family members and family members. But I'll never forget at her memorial, there were people who were just remembering what a good friend she was, what a good supporter, how she took in everyone in the family, everyone in the community as her child. And one of the people said through tears that he loved all that she had given him, but he never remembered her asking anybody else to take care of her. And I thought that was so, so telling. And
Mhm.
so that these women of the past have done amazing things while not asking anyone to take care of them. And so I thought it was really important to acknowledge that this book is moving into a new territory.
Mhm. Absolutely. So you talked about the fact that they were strong Black women, and one of the things that you also discuss in your book, what is the myth of the strong Black woman?
Well, it's a myth and a reality. For those of us raised in the Black community, there's a whole cultural ethos around the way that traditionally Black children and Black kids are raised. That is, there's some censoring of normal emotions because there's a fear that those normal emotions will endanger you.
Mm.
Um, I know as a kid, I was told, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Many of us heard that phrase. And
Yeah.
the strong Black woman is a belief that as a Black woman, you have a long legacy of physical strength and emotional
Mm,
strength. And that both belief and the acting out of that belief comes
mm,
from us having to adapt or maladapt to our enslavement. I mean, as enslaved people, there was no saying, I don't feel like getting up today, or I think I'll take a me day.
mm.
And so that,
Right.
like all groups who find themselves in oppressive situations, we made certain adaptations. So if we were expected to be strong physically and mentally out in the world, we took
Mm,
that back home. And that has served us very well in many ways. It has emphasized resilience,
mm,
um, um, and a lot of the things that have kept Black communities and Black families together under enormous pressure. But that strength is a maladaptation, not an adaptation, not a positive adaptation. And
right.
we now know we're part of a generation of women post 1960s, everything from the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the gay movement, um, all these movements that have opened up what it means to be a person, a viable, valuable, legitimate person in the world. Even Oprah Winfrey, for example, when she would have on her show people who would talk about subjects that for years had been taboo, all of that
Right.
has contributed to a conversation that we're having, probably been having at least for the last 15 years, as a result of all that, about mental health, emotional health, and what it means to be strong and the price we pay for not asking anyone for help, feeling that we always have to have things under control, that if something's broke, we can fix it, that we're the only ones who can do things and get them done right. And the irony is that on the one hand, this belief can give you an enormous sense of ego satisfaction. I've got this, I can handle this. What do you need done? When do you need it? But all of that energy is outer directed. And as we've come to understand how important the mind body connection is, we know that people pay in the body a terrific price for not practicing self care, not giving to themselves the kind of attention that they give to their children. If their kid has a cut, emergency room,
Right.
Black women will feel, well, I'll take care of it tomorrow. And so this is a really exciting time. And when I found myself doing the research for the book, I really felt very pleased to be part of a ongoing conversation.
Wow. That has so many thoughts that they're going through my brain right now. That's amazing. What really surprised you about writing this book?
Well, probably that I mean, okay, I'll backstory. Um, my mother died when I was 21, and my
Mm,
father died when I was 23. They were in their 60s. And in addition to the emotional trauma of that, one of the things that I decided to do was I looked at my parents and said, I'm going to live longer. No matter what, I'm going to live longer than they did. And so in my 20s, I started meditating, exercising, watching my diet. I would go to a therapist if I felt I needed it. And I was always regularly getting checkups. And
mhm,
so I was going to be a really, really healthy Black woman.
mhm.
So I've got this image of myself. I'm really strong. I've got it going on. Okay. I'm doing everything right. And so about 3 years ago, I had a little kind of episode where I thought I was having a stroke. I wasn't having a stroke, but it kind of mimicked it. Had an MRI, which revealed that I had had previously, sometime in the distant past, two silent strokes. Now, silent strokes, as though I know your audience knows all this, are very, very common. They do kill brain cells, but you can have a silent stroke and go on. But for me, because I had erected this image of myself that I have to be really strong, I have to be perfect, that really took me for a loop. I'm not supposed to have a silent stroke. Now, the other thing, however, is that if I had not been so militantly determined to be healthy, because I had inherited stroke from my mother in my gene pool, those two strokes could have been fatal.
Mm,
Okay, they could have been much more
right,
serious.
right.
So, by taking the lesson of my parents' early death and making a commitment to rigorous health as much as I could control it,
Mhm.
that was kind of a defense mechanism against the vagaries of your body. I mean, you can't control everything that your body does. Um, and yet, the more I wrote, the more I realized that I too still held on to certain attributes of this. You got to be strong, you got to be perfect.
Right.
I think the other shocking thing, the real shocker for me, I think, was when I was talking to a lot of therapists because the book is a book of voices.
Right.
There's my voice telling my story. There is voices of doctors and therapists. There are the voices of Black women talking openly about mental health issues and how they were healed by going into therapy.
Right.
Um, and so one of the therapists that I was talking to, we got to talking about a study she had done where she asked 50 African American women who were therapists, psychologists, counselors, and their Black female clients to answer a survey about health. And it
Mhm.
was mostly about peace and joy and happiness. And she was surprised, and I was surprised when she said that most of the people who answered the survey believed, quote, that peace of mind was something for white women. That as
Mm,
Black women living in and raising children and having families in a society where, despite the advances and the progress, there remain considerable blocks to progress,
mhm,
that are macro and micro.
mhm.
And we know that racism is a stress factor that gets into your body. When I was doing my book about Alzheimer's several years ago, that's the thing. I said, oh my God, doctors now know that having to deal with racial stress
Mhm.
gets into your body, makes it harder for you to get healthy and stay healthy. So she said she was just shocked that Black women said, well, that's for white women. And she concluded that perhaps when Black women go into therapy, for
Mhm.
example, uh, that the number one thing the therapist has to do is convince them that they have a right to peace of mind and joy. And I was really shocked at that.
Right.
And because I've learned how to weave joy and happiness over the years into my life. But I'll give you an example. One of the women in the book talked about, and when I shared this with her, we talked about this,
Mhm.
and she said years ago she was working on a particular job, and one of her white colleagues was diagnosed with an illness. Okay,
Mhm.
so the doctor said, well, you can still work with this, while we're treating you. Well, this white woman said, well, no, I'm going to take leave from my job and devote myself just to my health.
Mm.
And my friend said, I never would have thought of doing that. I never would have thought that I deserved time off to get well. I've got to keep on going. I've got to keep on working. And she now is a woman who understands the choice that her white female colleague made. But for many Black women, it is a real struggle to learn how to put themselves first. And if you're not putting yourself, it's like on the airplane. If the airplane's going down, you put your mask on first. So many Black women are um, heads of household.
Mhm.
They're leaders in their community. One of the most joyful things I discovered when I was writing the book is, like, for example, somebody like Rosa Parks. She did yoga and she meditated and she lived in her 90s so that she had a life that was full of activism and full of stress.
Right.
And she made a decision that she was going to care for her body almost as a political choice.
Wow. Yes, to all of that. You're rendering me almost speechless, right? Because we all struggle with that, taking that time off and that self-care, right? A couple of times in the book, you actually mentioned the new age strong Black woman. What does that mean to be a new
Well,
age
that's
strong
my
Black woman?
that's just a phrase I designed because the new age strong, and it's so interesting. The new age strong Black woman, in my definition, is a woman who both honors the tradition that she's received from her female ancestors about the lessons about the importance of being present to for others, being supportive of others,
Hmm.
caring for others in your family and in your community. But she also recognizes that she has a right to redefine strength.
Hmm.
And so that strength can encompass um, vulnerability.
Hmm.
It takes an enormous amount of courage, for example, to say, I'm going to make an appointment with a therapist. It takes an enormous amount of courage to say, I'm feeling something in my body and I've put it off. I'm going to finally take care of it. And so we have a tendency to feel that strength means never acknowledging pain, uncertainty, difficulty, weakness.
Hmm.
But new strong age women acknowledge that those are normal, even healthy responses to what's going on around us or what's going on in our lives. Someone asked me once, he said, well, Marita, I read your book and I really liked it, but um, if I give up being strong, does it mean I have to be weak? And I said, no, it means that you do what I just said. And one woman asked me, she said, well, how do I talk to my daughter about this? I mean, I want her as a young Black woman to be very successful. I want her to work hard. And she needs to know that she's going to have to work twice as hard. So I said, well, you can have that conversation with her, but you also need to make part of the conversation that for her mental and physical health, she needs to understand that she needs to rest,
Hmm.
that she needs time for play, that she has a right to be joyful and happy. And just as our mothers had these conversations, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about, um, uh, things like that, that censored that those vulnerable expressions. And they basically, through those conversations, made us censor normal feelings. We can have the same kinds of reverse conversations
Hmm.
with our daughters that do the opposite. One of the women in the book, uh, I interviewed her first for the book. And then
Hmm.
after I'd finished, I was checking in with her just to see how she was. And we were talking about going through COVID. And she said that her partner, her male partner during COVID had kind of where he was really feeling bad. This was in the early days
Hmm.
where we didn't know what it was, we didn't know how to treat it. And
Right.
so they went to the emergency room. And in those days, they were doing things like, you come in, you've got these symptoms, we're overloaded. Here's some aspirin, go home, come back in 3 days if you still feel bad. So they went home and he got worse and worse. And so they get in the car to drive back to the hospital. And her daughter, her 12-year daughter, is in the back seat.
Hmm.
So as they're driving to the car, he dies.
Oh
He just
no.
dies. Stops breathing, just right there in the car. And that's the end. And so naturally, this is terribly shocking, terribly traumatic. And we talked about the fact that she immediately got into therapy by herself. She got her daughter into therapy, and then they got therapy together.
Mm.
And she said that it was so powerful that she allowed her daughter to see her cry.
Mm.
And by allowing her daughter to see her cry, her daughter felt that she had the approval to cry as well. And the fact that they cried together allowed them to heal one another. Now, conversely, in the family of a friend, I was taking her nieces out to see a movie one day, and they had lost their stepfather, who they
Mm.
were very, very close to.
Mhm.
And the 10-year-old, I was saying, oh, I know this is a hard time. I know it's been difficult. I know I've been crying. And the 10-year-old said, no, Aunt Marita, I haven't cried. I haven't cried yet. And so she's 10 years old, and already she's a strong Black woman.
Right.
And so I realized that my job in relation to her was to have conversations with her
Mhm.
about you can cry. I cry a lot,
Mhm.
I cry. And I think that people forget that all these things that we feel, somebody told us those things. If we
Right.
feel like we're not enough, somebody told us that. If we feel that we're great, somebody told us that. If
Mhm.
we feel that we can do something, somebody probably believed us into doing that.
Mhm.
And so if we want to raise children who have a balanced emotional response to the world, we simply have conversations with them about that because we've had those conversations ourselves.
Wow, so many incredible nuggets just now. I want to touch on a couple of them. One, you did mention COVID, and that's actually what birthed this health equity book series, right? As we talk about health equity and disparities in Tennessee. So thank you very much for mentioning and that part of the story. And then I also wanted to make a comment for those that are watching this program live. We encourage you to drop your questions in the chat. We will get to your questions towards the end after I've asked my first round of questions. So we really encourage you to drop those in the chat feature. So I wanted to read a small snippet from your book in the chapter "Both Sides Now." You said, "quote, Black women often fail to seek mental health care." So kind of in the same alignment of this conversation we're having right now. You said this is fact, not conjecture. Only 1/3 of Black Americans who need mental health care receive it. The former First Lady, or as she's known in the Black community as the First Lady forever, Michelle Obama, has spoken openly and passionately about the stigma attached to mental health crises and the need to address and respond to our mental health needs. In the African American community, that stigma is generations old, end quote. Why is that?
Well, first, I want to contextualize this by saying that um, even though in the white community there is less stigma,
Mhm.
a lot of the stigma is class based. Also, I think that this new generation of young people, and especially young Black people, no longer feels the stigma. And
Mhm.
so their job is to help the older generation get rid of the stigma. But the stigma against seeking mental health care is very generational and very deep. We as a people in this country have been drastically and sometimes murderously
Mhm.
disserved and underserved
Mhm.
by the medical industrial complex.
Mhm.
We are the people who Black women were experimented on without anesthesia in the early days of defining what gynecology was. We are the people who the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was
Mhm.
done on. And so there is very little, if we just look at that past, there's very little reason on the face of it for African Americans to trust the medical industrial complex.
Mhm.
And mental health is part of that. And
Mhm.
we have been committed to mental institutions as punishment. We've been criminalized in many ways. So
Mhm.
that resistance is not so much based in, I don't want to get well,
Mhm.
but this system was not designed to make me well if I get sick.
Yeah.
It was designed to keep me sick or to experiment on my body.
Mhm.
That is the backdrop. Then there's also the feeling that, for example, if you seek mental health, in a lot of Black families, there's this belief that you don't tell anybody our business. You don't go out. Now, one of the reasons you don't tell anybody our business is because you don't know what they're going to do with that business.
Mhm.
And I'm going to speak frankly here, some white lady knocks on the door and the children are left at home alone and she pokes around. What is she there for? In the instance of too many instances of Black people telling bureaucrats, telling the government, telling people in white coats, your business ended in calamity.
Mhm.
Now, we are growing out of that, but that's the backdrop.
Right.
So now that we're in a period where all of this is changing, and the Black church was another resistant force. I mean, because we are we've lived in a society that was so dedicated in so many important ways to our, I'm going to say it, to our demise and to our ill health. People felt, well, God is my doctor.
Mm.
Jesus is my, in fact, there's a hymn, Jesus is my doctor. And so that the church became the place where mental health issues were dealt with. You prayed, you talked to your pastor, but more and more progressive denominations are having conversations about mental health and the need for people to get mental health support when they need it. Um, so I think that that is a reality, but I think it's growing to a point where the stigma is disappearing. We now have a situation, however, where there are more people who really want to get mental health
Right.
than practitioners.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a society, because of the way it's structured economically and class-wise, that is designed to produce enormous amounts of anxiety in everybody, so
Mhm.
that white people feel enormous anxiety about being white and maintaining the privileges of being white.
Mhm.
Black people feel anxiety about being Black and trying to overcome the deficits of being Black. And
Mhm.
so this is an anxiety producing society.
Mhm.
Um, and so we're at a point now, we're having this great conversation, and
Right.
we've got to increase the number of people who can help people
Mhm.
and access. And I have to say, I mean, the Obamacare was the signature achievement, I think, of President Obama's 8 years. And I know people whose lives have been saved by Obamacare. I know people whose mental health has been saved by that. So we really do need a really solid healthcare system for all.
Wow, thank you so much for that. And in that same vein, we've got a question that came in from the chat. So as a reminder, folks, please put your questions in the chat. Wanted to touch on, if you could, about the connection between the need to demonstrate strength as a woman, as a Black woman, and treatment bias in healthcare.
I mean, what, you can't, I think before we came on, we were talking about the documentary Aftershock,
Hmm.
which is a really fine documentary on Hulu about Black maternal mortality.
Hmm.
And the thing that was so inspiring about this film that deals with a very tough subject is that it showed that around the country, people have become activists around this. And there is legislation in Congress
Hmm.
to deal with the imbalance in the mortality rate. Many hospitals are now retraining doctors so that they do listen to Black women when they say that we're in pain. So I think that even though that bias does exist, that's all the more reason why, if you find yourself with child,
Mhm.
you have to do everything you can uh, to make sure that you are as healthy as you can be. And you have to raise your voice as loud as you can um, to when you're in situations where you think you're not being heard. But that's the thing that I was very pleased with about that film, because I thought, oh gosh, a film about Black female mortality. How depressed do I want to be? But
Right.
it is a powerfully affirmative look at how people, there's a whole community of people, Black people, white people, people in the medical field, who are recognizing this and are responding to it. So that's the good news.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And again, we've got several healthcare providers that are watching and that are on our health disparities task force. And so thank you for making that note. So in the book, you touched on the Black Lives Matter movement and said, quote, Black women, when they grieve, too often find themselves binding their own wounds in silence. Can you explain why you made that statement?
Well, there's a section in the book where I interviewed Dr. Pamela Brewer, who's a psychotherapist, and we talked at length about the whole issue of grief and grieving. And one of the things that she mentioned that I think was so telling, she said, in a sense, Black women are grieving every day. That is because the violence that takes place in this society, you know, hits our community, even when it is violence, Black people against Black people, in
Mhm,
so many ways um, that are sensationalized by the media,
mhm,
dramatized by the media, and because we're all looking at media, we feel assaulted daily. Now, this is something that, as we have seen the rise in mass shootings, I think all of us, all Americans now, feel totally emotionally exhausted,
mhm,
assailed, assaulted
mhm.
by the levels of violence that are reported.
Right.
But what happens with Black women is the same, feeling that, well, someone's died, I've got to get back to work.
Mm,
Even if, for example, she talked about the fact that there's different ways that people respond to your grieving. Say, for example, in the workplace, um, if your child died of cancer,
mhm,
oh, we understand. Take take all the time you need.
mhm,
If your child died of a drug overdose, well, you've got a week.
mm,
And in so there's this bias, is the death a worthy death? Is
mm,
the death, was it connected with crime? And so we respond by how much compassion we give based on the way that the loved one died. And in our communities, we expect Black women to keep on marching, you know, go to the funeral, etc. And ironically, very often, if you see a Black movie, there are these there's always this scene, sometimes in these comedies, where there'll be a funeral and the older Black woman will go up to the casket and she will just be sobbing and crying. And now, this is grief, okay? This is an expression of grief, heartfelt, heart-wrenching grief. But it is rendered in such a way that it becomes laughable,
mhm,
that it is mocked
mhm,
and ridiculed.
mhm,
And what's being ridiculed is the expression of deep, deep sadness. So that if we show sadness, we're mocked and ridiculed. If we don't successfully grieve and allow ourselves the time we need, we may plunge into depression. And so, in terms of grief and grieving, we have to make our own space. We have to take our own space We have to take the time we need to actually grieve and recognize that it can be a years long process. And I think that grief is something that is not talked about much in our culture, just in this society at all, because we don't like to talk about death. And we, as a people under siege, often feel that to talk about those things that are that are vulnerable points or weak points, only exacerbates the weakness. But in actuality, I think it makes us stronger.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that. Our Health Disparities Task Force is comprised of a very diverse group of folks across the state of Tennessee and a couple of federal partners. And so, if anyone is reading your book, The Strong Black Woman, and they are not a Black woman, and they've done some in-depth reading, what do you hope their biggest takeaway would be after reading this book?
Well, I think that this is a book for anyone of any race who cares about the lives of Black people,
Mhm.
cares about and is interested in the lives of Black women. And some of the issues in this book are issues that affect the lives of just women in general. They play out in a particular way in the lives of Black women, but the whole issue of, working too hard and not self-care, that's for women in general. But I would hope that this is a book that that allows the reader to connect
Mm,
with Black women and
mhm.
to gain an understanding of the complexity uh, and of the emotional lives of Black women and what they have to face.
Absolutely. We talked about it a little bit beginning of the hour, and you certainly highlight storytelling in your book. Why is it so important for Black women specifically to share our personal stories?
Well, even though there's been enormous progress in terms of representation,
Mhm.
representation in media, representation in books, Black women are still victimized by sexism within our community. We're still wrestling with the idea that our stories matter as much as men's stories. And so one of the most powerful things about stories is that they are regenerative and generating.
Mhm.
And we need to tell our stories not just to other Black women, we need to tell our story to Black men.
Mhm.
This book needs to be given to Black men who had a Black mother, a Black sister, a Black partner, a Black wife, so that they will understand what their job is in relation to that woman.
Mhm.
To when she says, I need a me day. Well, what's a me day? Don't worry about it. I'm taking it anyway. I mean, give her the space that she needs.
Yeah.
So I think that I don't see us just sharing our stories with other Black women, even though there's something, of course, unique about that. I think these stories need to be heard by everybody.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree. So as I was working on your questions, I noticed a question on the back of the book. So those that actually have the book, and I wanted to ask this question of you. What you state on the back says, "How high is the price you pay to be a strong Black woman?" So we talked about the price we pay earlier in the
Yeah, in ill
discussion.
health.
Yeah.
I mean, we are the leading we're the fastest growing segment of the population, Black women developing Alzheimer's. We have
Mm,
disproportionately high rates of cardiac disease, stroke, obesity, and um, the obesity issue is particularly troubling because, see, this generation has grown up on McDonald's and
mhm,
highly processed food.
mhm,
And so it's like the food industry has created on purpose unhealthy Americans
mhm,
across the board. And then when you talk about so many African Americans living in, well, no, suffering from food apartheid. I do not use the phrase food desert because that makes it sound like it's some sort of naturally occurring thing.
mhm,
Now, Food apartheid means that you live in a neighborhood where you can't get fresh vegetables,
Yes.
where there's no supermarket, where all you have is convenience stores, the corner store, and fast food.
Mm-hmm.
And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of communities populated mostly by poor people, mostly by poor Black people, who live like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you go in and you talk to them and say, well, you need to watch your diet. Okay, well, bring a supermarket market here, and then I'll get healthy. So it's a situation where there's what we can do personally, but there's what we have a right to expect from the cities that we live in, from the country that we live in. But we really, I really do feel that Black women are in a national health emergency. And it doesn't matter, it's across class. It's not like you you go to, a group of women who are upper class.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to I've talked to upper class women, highly educated Black women who
Mm-hmm.
haven't had a mammogram in 5 years,
Mm.
who have great health care plans, who don't have the excuse that they're not care, they don't have the coverage.
Right.
So I think that what I found is that it doesn't matter the class. Black women are neglecting their bodies
Mm-hmm.
in ways that are quite dangerous. So, and we consider ourselves leaders. We want to change our communities, want to change our. Well, if you don't live long enough to bring about change,
Absolutely.
so
And,
yeah.
and what does that price that we pay, and we being as a Black woman myself, how does that impact society as a whole, right? What's the bigger impact there?
Well, it means that Black communities lose Black mothers. You know, it means also that everybody has certain intelligence and creativity to bring to society.
Hmm.
Everybody has a particular way of looking at the world. And if we're not caring for our bodies, we're conspiring with the forces out to get us.
Hmm.
And we're denying the world something very special, something very precious. I'll never forget, this was back in the, what was it? It was back in the, maybe the 90s. There was a operation, a very delicate operation that was done by two Black women. It was some groundbreaking medical thing.
Hmm.
And these two Black women were like in their mid 30s and they were doctors. And I just said, oh my God, like this is amazing. What if they had not had the opportunity to go to medical school, you know, and manifest and express their genius for healing? And so when we are not caring for our bodies in the way we need to, I think that's a good question. What is the world losing?
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. What is the world losing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few more minutes left, and we've got about one more other question that I have on my list. But I want to encourage anyone that is watching this live, if you have a question, to put that in the chat. We're about at that time for the Q&A. If you have a question for Miss Marita Golden. And one of my last questions before we get to that, what do you hope the next generation of Black women and others? So we have a very diverse health disparities task force, but what do you hope the next generation, when they find this book and they read this book, what will they be able to add to it? What's your hope?
Well, I think that they're going to be the next generation of leaders. And so, as much as I put in this book, they're going to be able to write another book
Hmm.
that's based on their activism,
Hmm.
that's based on the fact that their generation no longer fears going to see a therapist, that their generation is walking and hiking and doing all these things. So they're going to have a story to tell, I think, that is going to be very powerful. And I think they'll also have a story to tell of medical activism.
Hmm. Well, wonderful. Again, Ms. Golden, it has been certainly a pleasure of mine of having this conversation with you. And again, do you have any final words that you would like to provide to those that are not only watching this live, but who will watch the recording about not only your work, but also specifically about this book, as we've been discussing today, The Strong Black Woman?
Well, just that, our health is, our bodies are these amazing machines, and we are stewards of them. And I really think it's our job to honor our bodies
Mhm,
and care for them. And that's a really, I mean, that affects not just our body, but our minds. It affects our spirits as well. And so I would just say to talk about health.
mhm,
We don't talk about health until we're sick.
mhm.
And I think we need to talk about health and being healthy and being strong as a matter of course.
Absolutely. We do have a question that's come in the chat. And before I get to it, thank you for saying that about preventative, right? And so, as we've talked about this health equity series, it was being brought to you by the Division of Health Disparities Elimination, the Office of Primary Prevention, and the Health Equity Advisory Team at the Department of Health. And so, so thank you for mentioning that preventative part, right? Because that's some of the things that we are trying to do among the Health Disparities Task Force. We do have a question in the chat that says, are there things the church can do better to support Black women?
Well, one of the things that it can do better is to put the traditional Black churches to put more Black women in leadership roles. I mean, typically, the pulpit is off limits to Black women. So I'm arguing Black women need to be in the pulpit. I think also that the churches can be more aggressive about having really difficult conversations
Mhm,
that families and Black women specifically need to have about their health.
mhm,
And I think very often Black churches are very sort of top down. I think there needs to be more bottom up leadership.
mhm.
Let the young people propose some ideas, and yes, and let women do more than serve in sort of support roles. Um, have difficult conversations. Let Black women talk about the things that you're afraid to have them talk about, and let them know that those conversations can be had in church.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Marita Golden. If you all are still watching and are watching the replay, we encourage you to read The Strong Black Woman. As she has mentioned, it is for everyone. And as soon as I said that, we've got another question. Let me go to the chat. What is some key advice you would provide to young Black women who are working to find their voice?
Well, figure out what it is you want to say.
Hmm.
And I have always had in my life sister circles. That is, Black women who are my friends, who are my sounding board and my cheerleading squad. And they have given me strength. I give them strength. And they are an echo of my voice. So I think you have to figure out what it is you want to say and then seek out other Black women who you've seen who have a voice and know how to use it. Ask them how they did it. Use them as your mentors.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Again, everyone, if you have not purchased or have read The Strong Black Woman, we strongly encourage you to do so. Marita Golden, thank you so much for being on with us and speaking to our Health Disparities Task Force and all the others who have joined this conversation. If you are not a member of the task force, we really do encourage you to join us. We are working very hard here in Tennessee to reduce the health disparities among our entire population. So please simply send an email to TDH, it's tdh.ofbce@tn.gov. I am Elizabeth Hart. I'm the Director of the Office of Faith-Based and Community Engagement. Again, we welcome you to attend the final session on November 8th, where we will have a conversation with Dr. Damon Tweedy. He will be discussing his book, which is called Black Man in a White Coat, A Doctor's Reflections on Race and Medicine. Please learn more about what we are doing in Tennessee at www.healthdisparitiestn.com. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.